Why dost not comfort me, and help me out from this unhallowed and blood-stained hole? Titus Andronicus.
On the next morning, great was the alarm and confusion of the officers, when they discovered the escape of their prisoner. MacGuffig appeared before Glosson with a head perturbed with brandy and fear, and incurred a most severe reprimand for neglect of duty. The resentment of the justice appeared only to be suspended by his anxiety to recover possession of the prisoner, and the thief-takers, glad to escape from his awful and incensed presence, were sent off in every direction, except the right one, to recover their prisoner, if possible. Glosson particularly recommended a careful search at the cave of Derncliu, which was occasionally occupied under night by vagrants of different descriptions. Having thus dispersed his myrmidons in various directions, he himself hastened by devious paths through the wood of Warwick, to his appointed interview with Hatterick, from whom he hoped to learn at more leisure than last night's conference admitted, the circumstances attending the return of the heir of Ellangowan to his native country. With maneuvers like those of a fox when he doubles to avoid the pack, Glosson strove to approach the place of appointment in a manner which should leave no distinct track of his course. Would to heaven it would snow, he said, looking upward, and hide these footprints. Should one of the officers light upon them, he would run the scent up, like a bloodhound, and surprise us. I must get down upon the sea beach, and contrive to creep along beneath the rocks. And accordingly, he descended from the cliffs with some difficulty, and scrambled along between the rocks and the advancing tide, now looking up to see if his motions were watched from the rocks above him, now casting a jealous glance to mark if any boat appeared upon the sea, from which his course might be discovered. But even the feelings of selfish apprehension were for a time superseded, as Glosson passed the spot where Kennedy's body had been found. It was marked by the fragment of rock which had been precipitated from the cliff above, either with the body or after it. The mass was now encrusted with small shellfish, and tasseled with tangle and seaweed, but still its shape and substance were different from those of the other rocks which lay scattered around. His voluntary walks, it will readily be believed, had never led to this spot, so that finding himself now there for the first time after the terrible catastrophe, the scene at once recurred to his mind with all its accompaniments of horror. He remembered how, like a guilty thing, gliding from the neighboring place of concealment, he had mingled with eagerness, yet with caution, among the terrified group who surrounded the corpse, dreading lest anyone should ask from whence he came. He remembered, too, with what conscious fear he had avoided gazing upon that ghastly spectacle.
The wild scream of his patron, "My bairn!
My bairn!" again rang in his ears. "Good God," he exclaimed, "land is all I have gained worth the agony of that moment, and the thousand anxious fears and horrors which have since embittered my life. Oh, how I wish that I lay where that wretched man lies, and that he stood here in life and health, but these regrets are all too late." Stifling, therefore, his feelings, he crept forward to the cave, which was so near the spot where the body was found, that the smugglers might have heard from their hiding place the various conjectures of the bystanders concerning the fate of their victim.
But nothing could be more completely concealed than the entrance to their asylum.
The opening, not larger than that of a foxearth, lay in the face of the cliff directly behind a large black rock, or rather upright stone, which served at once to conceal it from strangers, and as a mark to point out its situation to those who used it as a place of retreat. The space between the stone and the cliff was exceedingly narrow, and being heaped with sand and other rubbish, the most minute search would not have discovered the mouth of the cavern, without removing those substances which the tide had drifted before it. For the purpose of further concealment, it was usual with the contraband traders who frequented this haunt, after they had entered, to stuff the mouth with withered seaweed loosely piled together as if carried there by the waves.
Dirk Hatterick had not forgotten this precaution.
Glosson, though a bold and hardy man, felt his heart throb and his knees knock together, when he prepared to enter this den of secret iniquity, in order to hold conference with a felon, whom he justly accounted one of the most desperate and depraved of men. But he has no interest to injure me, was his consolatory reflection. He examined his pocket pistols, however, before removing the weeds and entering the cavern, which he did upon hands and knees. The passage, which at first was low and narrow, just admitting entrance to a man in a creeping posture, expanded after a few yards into a high arched vault of considerable width. The bottom, ascending gradually, was covered with the purest sand. Ere Glosson had got upon his feet, the hoarse yet suppressed voice of Hatteraick growled through the recesses of the cave.
Hegel and Donner, beast-do? Are you in the dark? Dark? Der Devil. Aye, said Dirk Hatteraick, where should I have a glim?
I have brought light, and Glosson accordingly produced a tinder box, and lighted a small lantern. You must kindle some fire too, for hold Michigan der Devil, LCH bin ganz Jeffrorn. It is a cold place to be sure, said Glosson, gathering together some decayed staves of barrels and pieces of wood, which had perhaps lain in the cavern since Hatteraick was there last.
Cold? Snowwasser and Hegel.
It's perdition, I could only keep myself alive by rambling up and down this D.D. vault, and thinking about the merry rouses we have had in it. The flame then began to blaze brightly, and Hatteraick hung his bronzed visage, and expanded his hard and sinewy hands over it, with an avidity resembling that of a famished wretch to whom food is exposed. The light showed his savage and stern features, and the smoke, which in his agony of cold he seemed to endure almost to suffocation, after circling round his head, rose to the dim and rugged roof of the cave, through which it escaped by some secret rents or clefts in the rock, the same doubtless that afforded air to the cavern when the tide was in, at which time the aperture to the sea was filled with water. And now I have brought you some breakfast, said Glosson, producing some cold meat and a flask of spirits. The latter Hatteraick eagerly seized upon, and applied to his mouth, and, after a hearty draught, he exclaimed with great rapture, Das schmeckt.
That is good, that warms the liver.
Then broke into the fragment of a High Dutch song. Soffen Bier, und Brand Wein, schmeißen Zelle die Fenster nie ein, LCH ben liederlich, du bist liederlich, sind wir nicht liederlich Lude.
Well said, my hearty captain, cried Glosson, endeavoring to catch the tone of revelry.
Gin by pailfuls, wine in rivers.
Dash the window blast to shivers. For 3 wild lads were we, brave boys.
And 3 wild lads were we.
Thou on the land, and I on the sand. And Jack on the gallows tree. That's it, my bully boy.
Why, you're alive again now, and now let us talk about our business. Your business, if you please, said Hatteraick, Hegel and Donner, mine was done when I got out of the bilboes. Have patience, my good friend, I'll convince you our interests are just the same.
Hatteraick gave a short dry cough, and Glosson, after a pause, proceeded. How came you to let the boy escape?
Why, Flutch and Blitzen. He was no charge of mine. Lieutenant Brown gave him to his cousin that's in the Middelburg house of Van Beest and Van Bruggen, and told him some goose's gazette about his being taken in a skirmish with the landsharks he gave him for a footboy. Me let him escape, the bastard Kinchin should have walked the plank ere I troubled myself about him.
Well, and was he bred a footboy then?
Neen, the Kinchin got about the old man's heart, and he gave him his own name, and bred him up in the office, and then sent him to India. I believe he would have packed him back here, but his nephew told him it would do up the free trade for many a day, if the youngster got back to Scotland.
Do you think the younker knows much of his own origin now?
Devil, replied Hatteraick, how should I tell what he knows now? But he remembered something of it long. When he was but 10 years old, he persuaded another Satan's limb of an English bastard like himself to steal my lugger's boat, what do you call it, to return to his country, as he called it, fire him. Before we could overtake them, they had the skiff out of channel as far as the Durlu, the boat might have been lost. I wish to heaven she had with him in her, ejaculated Glosson.
Why, I was so angry myself, that, sapperment.
I did give him a tip over the side, but split him. The comical little devil swam like a duck, so I made him swim astern for a mile to teach him manners, and then took him in when he was sinking, by the knocking Nicholas. He'll plague you, now he's come over the herring pond. When he was so high, he had the spirit of thunder and lightning.
How did he get back from India?
Why, how should I know? The house there was done up, and that gave us a shake at Middleburg, I think, so they sent me again to see what could be done among my old acquaintances here, for we held old stories were done away and forgotten. So I had got a pretty trade on foot within the last 2 trips, but that stupid houndsfoot Shelm, Brown, has knocked it on the head again, I suppose, with getting himself shot by the colonel man.
Why were you not with them? Why, you see, sapperment.
I fear nothing, but it was too far within land, and I might have been scented.
True. But to return to this youngster. Donner and Blitzen.
He's your affair, said the captain.
How do you really know that he is in this country?
Why, Gabriel saw him up among the hills.
Gabriel. Who is he?
A fellow from the gypsies, that, about 18 years since, was pressed on board the D.D. fellow Pritchard's sloop of war. It was he came off and gave us warning that the shark was coming round upon us the day Kennedy was done, and he told us how Kennedy had given the information. The gypsies and Kennedy had some quarrel besides. This Gab went to the East Indies in the same ship with your younker, and Sapperment knew him well, though the other did not remember him. Gab kept out of his eye though, as he had served the States against England, and was a deserter to boot, and he sent us word directly, that we might know of his being here, though it does not concern us a rope's end. So, then, really, and in sober earnest, he is actually in this country, Hatterake, between friend and friend, asked Glosson seriously.
Wetter and Donner, y'all, what do you take me for?
For a bloodthirsty, fearless miscreant, thought Glosson internally, but said aloud, and which of your people was it that shot young Hazelwood?
Sturmwetter, said the captain, do ye think we were mad? None of us, man got.
The country was too hot for the trade already with that D.D. frolic of Brown's, attacking what you call Woodbourne House.
Why, I am told, said Glosson, it was Brown who shot Hazelwood?
Not our lieutenant, I promise you, for he was laid 6 feet deep at Derncleugh the day before the thing happened to Toussaint Davils. Man, I d'ye think that he could rise out of the earth to shoot another man? A light here began to break upon Glosson's confusion of ideas.
Did you not say that the younker, as you call him, goes by the name of Brown? Of Brown?
Ja, Van Beest Brown, old Van Beest Brown, of our Van Beest in Van Bruggen, gave him his own name, he did. Then, said Glosson, rubbing his hands, it is he, by heaven, who has committed this crime. And what have we to do with that? Demanded Hatterake. Glosson paused, and, fertile in expedients, hastily ran over his project in his own mind, and then drew near the smuggler with a confidential air.
You know, my dear Hatterake, it is our principal business to get rid of this young man?
Answered Dirk Hatterake dash. Not, continued Glosson, not that I would wish any personal harm to him if we can do without. Now, he is liable to be seized upon by justice, both as bearing the same name with your lieutenant, who was engaged in that affair at Woodbourne, and for firing at young Hazelwood with intent to kill or wound.
Aye, said Dirk Hatterake, but what good will that do you?
He'll be loose again as soon as he shows himself to carry other colors.
True, my dear Dirk, well noticed, my friend Hatterake.
But there is ground enough for a temporary imprisonment till he fetches proofs from England or elsewhere, my good friend. I understand the law, Captain Hatterake, and I'll take it upon me, simple Gilbert Glosson of Ellangowan, Justice of Peace for the county of, to refuse his bail, if he should offer the best in the country, until he is brought up for a second examination. Now where d'ye think I'll incarcerate him?
Hagel and Wetter. What do I care? Stay, my friend, you do care a great deal. Do you know your goods, that were seized and carried to Woodbourne, are now lying in the custom house at Porton Ferry? A small fishing town. Now I will commit this younker. When you have caught him?
When I have caught him, I shall not be long about that. I will commit him to the workhouse, or Bridewell, which you know is beside the custom house.
Yeah, the rasp house, I know it very well.
I will take care that the redcoats are dispersed through the country. You land at night with the crew of your lugger, receive your own goods, and carry the younker Brown with you back to Flushing.
Won't that do? Aye, carry him to Flushing, said the captain, or to America?
Aye, my friend.
Or to Jericho. Pshaw! Wherever you have a mind. Aye, or pitch him overboard.
Nay, I advise no violence. Neen, you leave that to me.
Wetter. I know you of old. But, hark ye, what am I, Dirk Hatterake, to be the better of this?
Why, is it not your interest as well as mine, said Glosson. Besides, I set you free this morning.
You set me free, Donner and Devil. I set myself free. Besides, it was all in the way of your profession, and happened a long time ago. Ha ha ha. Pshaw!
Don't let us jest. I am not against making a handsome compliment, but it's your affair as well as mine.
What do you talk of my affair? Is it not you that keep the bouncer's whole estate from him?
Dirk Hatterake never touched a stiver of his rents. Hush, I tell you it shall be a joint business.
Why, will ye give me half the kit?
What, half the estate, d'ye mean?
Ye should set up house together at Ellangowan, and take the barony, ridgeabout? Sturmwetter, no.
But you might give me half the value, half the gelt.
Live with you?
Neen, I would have a lusthouse of mine own on the Middleburg Dyke, and a Blumengarten like a burgomaster's.
Aye, and a wooden lion at the door, and a painted sentinel in the garden, with a pipe in his mouth. But, hark ye, Hatterake, what will all the tulips, and flower gardens, and pleasure houses in the Netherlands do for you, if you are hanged here in Scotland? Hatterake's countenance fell. Der Devil. Hanged?
Aye, hanged, Mynheer Captain. The devil can scarce save Dirk Hatterake from being hanged for a murderer and kidnapper, if the younker of Ellangowan should settle in this country, and if the gallant captain chances to be caught here re-establishing his fair trade. And I won't say, but, as peace is now so much talked of, their high mightinesses may not hand him over to oblige their new allies, even if he remained in Federient.
Pause Bagel Blitzen and Donner. I doubt you say true.
Not, said Glosson, perceiving he had made the desired impression, not that I am against being civil, and he slid into Hatterake's passive hand a banknote of some value. Is this all, said the smuggler, you had the price of half a cargo for winking at our job, and made us do your business too. But, my good friend, you forget, in this case you will recover all your own goods.
Aye, at the risk of all our own necks, we could do that without you.
I doubt that, Captain Hatterake, said Glosson dryly, because you would probably find a dozen redcoats at the custom house, whom it must be my business, if we agree about this matter, to have removed. Come, I will be as liberal as I can, but you should have a conscience.
Now strafe Michigan der Defel, this provokes me more than all the rest. You rob and you murder, and you want me to rob and murder, and play the silver cooper, or kidnapper, as you call it, a dozen times over, and then, haggle and winsturm. You speak to me of conscience. Can you think of no fairer way of getting rid of this unlucky lad?
No, Mainher, but as I commit him to your charge.
To my charge, to the charge of steel and gunpowder.
And well, if it must be, it must, but you have a tolerably good guess what's like to come of it.
Oh, my dear friend, I trust no degree of severity will be necessary, replied Glossin.
Severity, said the fellow, with a kind of groan. I wish you had had my dreams when I first came to this dog-hole, and tried to sleep among the dry seaweed. First, there was that D.D. fellow there, with his broken back, sprawling as he did when I hurled the rock over atop on him. Ha, ha, you would have sworn he was lying on the floor where you stand, wriggling like a crushed frog, and then—
Nay, my friend, said Glossin, interrupting him, what signifies going over this nonsense? If you are turned chicken-hearted, why, the game's up, that's all, the game's up with us both. Chicken-hearted? No. I have not lived so long upon the account to start at last, neither for devil nor Dutchman. Well then, take another schnapps, the cold's at your heart, Stilda, and now tell me, are any of your old crew with you?
Neen all dead, shot, hanged, drowned, and damned.
Brown was the last all dead, but Gypsy Gab, and he would go off the country for a spill of money, or he'll be quiet for his own sake, or old Meg, his aunt, will keep him quiet for hers.
Which Meg?
Meg Merrilees, the old devil's limb of a gypsy witch.
Is she still alive?
Ja.
And in this country?
And in this country. She was at the Came of Derncleugh, at Van Beest Brown's last wake, as they call it, the other night, with 2 of my people, and some of her own blasted gypsies.
That's another breaker ahead, Captain. Will she not squeak, think ye?
Not she won't start, she swore by the salmon, the great and inviolable oath of the strolling tribes, if we did the kinchin no harm, she would never tell how the gauger got it.
Why, man, though I gave her a wipe with my hanger in the heat of the matter, and cut her arm, and though she was so long after in trouble about it up at your Burrowtown there, der devil. Old Meg was as true as steel.
Why, that's true, as you say, replied Glossin. And yet if she could be carried over to Zealand, or Hamburg, or anywhere else, you know, it were as well. Hatteraick jumped upright upon his feet, and looked at Glossin from head to heel. I don't see the goat's foot, he said, and yet he must be the very devil, but Meg Merrilees is closer yet with the kobold than you are, and I had never such weather as after having drawn her blood. Neen, I'll meddle with her no more, she's a witch of the fiend, a real devil's kind, but that's her affair.
Donner and wetter.
I'll neither make nor meddle, that's her work, but for the rest, why, if I thought the trade would not suffer, I would soon rid you of the yunker, if you send me word when he's under embargo. In brief and undertones the 2 worthy associates concerted their enterprise, and agreed at which of his haunts Hatteraick should be heard of. The stay of his lugger on the coast was not difficult, as there were no king's vessels there at the time.